For more than 1,000 years, the city of Istanbul has stood as Europe's gateway to Asia. Today, it's the largest city in Turkey, the largest country in democratic Europe, and the waters of the Bosphorus on which it stands still have a unique strategic importance. They're the only access for the Russian fleet from the Black Sea to the Mediterranean, and a vital trade route for Bulgaria, Romania, and the Russian port of Odessa. Because of her position, Turkey has always been a vital part of NATO's southern flank. She has borders with 6 different countries and stands between Russia and the oil fields of the Middle East. The Americans have 4 bases here, mostly listening electronically to the nearby Russians and their missile programs. There used to be 26, but when Turkey invaded Cyprus and the Americans imposed an arms embargo, the Turks in retaliation reduced the number to 4. They decided that if they were going to stay in NATO, they'd have to soldier on themselves. Numerically, Turkey has the largest force of any NATO member. There are more than 500,000 men in the army alone, and their share of the defence budget is proportionately more than anywhere else in Europe. There's compulsory national service of 2 years, and here, at the military academy in the capital of Ankara, a 4-year course for officer cadets. 3,500 of them enjoy comparatively lavish facilities, but are put through some of the most gruelling of military routines. Since the recent events in neighbouring Iran, Turkey has become even more important strategically. But what worries her NATO allies is that now, at a time when they most need regional stability, the democracy which the Turkish armed forces are pledged to support has never seemed weaker. The biggest threat comes from growing political violence. Extreme left and right-wing groups have been busily arming themselves, and in the slums which they control, there are sectarian divisions which are as deep and as bitter as those of Beirut. Two years ago, unidentified gunmen fired into a mass rally in Taksim Square in the middle of Istanbul. 37 people were killed. In spite of the widest public outrage and shock, the violence still continued. Last year, nearly 1,000 people were killed in acts of terrorism. In the worst of these clashes, 100 people died in one day in the town of Maraş in southeast Turkey. And the government was forced to impose martial law in 13 provinces and all major cities. In Ankara, the capital, troops and armed military police are now patrolling the streets and guarding every bank. Turkey always was security conscious, but now even amateur photographers run obvious risks.
Cumhuriyet tarihimizde ilk kez bir başyazarın...
Political assassinations in Turkey are now running at the rate of 3 a day. In most cases, they are attacks and reprisals by extremists of both right and left, but sometimes there are killings with no obvious motive. One of these was the recent shooting of Mr. Abdi İpekçi, the moderate and famous editor of one of Turkey's most well-known newspapers. Mr. İpekçi's death was mourned by the whole political establishment and shocked people who'd become used to violence. But it also emphasized that martial law had not been a success and, according to some, increased the possibility of a military takeover. Turkey's political problems haven't been made any easier by a parallel crisis in the economy. 10 years ago, it almost seemed as if the country was on the edge of an economic boom. American military money was pouring in, and so were lavish international loans. But then came world recession, rising debt, and the oil crisis. To reduce the demand for oil, the government recently doubled the price of petrol. It's now nearly £2 a gallon, but the increase was preceded by so many rumours that there was widespread panic buying. There have been queues stretching for several miles, and in some cases, drivers waiting all night. The oil shortage has pushed inflation to 70%, and it's estimated that this could be 100% by the end of the year. And all the time, the country's going deeper into the red at the rate of nearly $200 million every month. Industry has also suffered. This factory, for instance, was set up 2 years ago outside Ankara and hoped to employ 400 men on steel construction, mainly for government projects. Last year, 70 men were made redundant, and there are only 200 left. Half the machinery is unused, and there isn't enough foreign exchange to buy raw materials to employ any more. Cement prices have just been increased, and the cost of importing the steel they use from Japan has trebled. There have been power cuts every day for the last 14 months. In Turkey, there's a bigger gulf between rich and poor than anywhere else in Europe. Thousands of people have flocked to the sprawling suburbs of jerry-built houses. They've come from the poorer villages in the hope of finding work, but here, we're told, only 1 in 10 has a job and there's no unemployment benefit. In the last elections, there were many people here who felt that there was one man who at least had a chance of solving Turkey's problems. The new Prime Minister, who was swept in by popular expectation then, was Mr. Bülent Ecevit.
İşler yolunda yani.
Yolunda dediğin dergi çıkmıyor ki.
Çıkacak inşallah.
Mr. Ecevit is a poet and a former journalist. His wife's an artist. Before he went into politics, he was press attaché at the Turkish embassy in London, and he's also studied in the United States. Mr. Ecevit campaigned on what he called left-of-centre policies, saw himself as a socialist and a democrat, and when he became Prime Minister, insisted on continuing his modest domestic lifestyle. A new cooperative housing development has been built in a forestry scheme 10 miles outside Ankara. And it's here that Mr. Ecevit and his wife still live in a block of flats. They're surrounded by pigeons presented by eager supporters who once thought that Mr. Ecevit was the only man who could rescue Turkey with loans from the West.
It has been rather disappointing for us. And this year we decided to prepare an economic rescue program based on the assumption that no support may be forthcoming, although it would be very difficult to recuperate the economy without any external support. I suppose lack of coordination between our friends and the difficulty of translating political will into action.
Are you saying that they simply don't understand Turkey's problems?
Well, they seem to understand it, but there seems to be a lack of coordination or the will to act.
Mr. Süleyman Demirel, the leader of the opposition, was Prime Minister himself for 10 years. He frequently attacks Mr. Ecevit on Turkish television, although strangely the sound is rarely used. He's been criticised for the way his government raised large foreign loans with apparently no controls, but maintains that at least Turkey was then better off than under the present austerity measures. He describes these very simply.
Nonsense.
Why do you say that?
It won't bring anything. It doesn't give any value. It's just a plant of words.
So what do you think will be the result of those policies?
Nothing will come out. He will talk a little bit more. He is finished, as far as I am concerned, as far as the country is concerned, as far as the people of the country is concerned.
You say he's finished?
Oh yes, definitely.
But if you were Prime Minister, what else could you do?
I was Prime Minister.
But if you were I know, but if you were Prime Minister now,
no, I'll tell you, I was Prime Minister 10 years. Then Turkey did not get such a position. Turkey was happy when I was Prime Minister.
but if you were Prime Minister now, How would you go about solving the present economic problems?
I will follow right economical and financial policy.
For more than a year, Mr. Ecevit has been promising that he'll lead Turkey out of her deepening crisis. But today there's still no sign of any significant economic improvement and little chance of more investment or tourism while the violence continues. Mr. Ecevit's always blamed his predecessors for not taking firm action soon enough.
For over 10 years, thousands of people were trained to be militant terrorists in Turkey. Most of them rightist and some extreme leftist. And the rightist terrorists had been given official sanction and protection for many years. And the leftist, extreme leftist terrorists were given a closed eye, and the rightist terrorists were left free to deal with the leftist ones. It was for the first time with our government that we started taking stern measures against terrorists, whether they be leftists or rightists.
They have given lots of courage to terrorism when they were in the opposition.
You're saying that the present government has encouraged terrorism?
I am blaming them. I am accusing them. They are the father of terrorism in this country. How come they will stop the terrorism?
What evidence do you have for saying that they have encouraged terrorism?
All the so-called associations, they push the terrorism under the protection of the government. They share the government with them. And there are many evidences. And then actually we have the terrorism between 1971 and 73. Those people involved in terrorism, they got the amnesty in 1974 from this government.
This is a very serious accusation to make, to say that the present government is actually has encouraged terrorism.
They did, yes.
Ecevit'in bölücülerle işbirliği yaptığı
The government is also blamed by the ultra-right-wing Nationalist Action Party. Its leader is a former army colonel whose consistent message has been that Turkey must be saved from the perils of international communism. In some quarters, the party is fast growing in popularity and now has 17 MPs. As far as the left is concerned, Mr. Alparslan Türkeş is merely a fascist whose strength depends on his links with armed gangs like the commandos of the so-called Grey Wolves. It's a charge which, of course, he denies.
well, we don't have any such kind of organizations. This is another accusation, and this is another fabricated news, I should say to you.
There is no such organization in Turkey now.
No, there is no such organization as Grey Wolf. Grey Wolves in Turkey.
And you have never been connected with any such organization in the past?
No.
What
We have same political organizations as the other Turkish political parties have. For example, People's Republican Party, Mr. Ecevit's party. What kind of organizations they are having? We are having same organizations. We don't have any different organizations.
Why did you start those youth training camps in your party that I think you call the
This is another.
idealist hearth?
This is another lie. This is another false accusation. Since many years, we are working a political party, and this kind of activities is forbidden against according our laws.
How do you answer the charges of both Mr. Demirel and Mr. Türkeş that your government has actually encouraged terrorism because you have been lenient towards the left-wing terrorists?
No, on the contrary, even when we were in opposition, we always attacked extreme leftist terrorists as much as we attacked the extreme rightist terrorists. But Mr. Demirel has thus far ignored even the existence of rightist terrorists, and it is common knowledge that Türkeş's party has been behind extreme rightist terrorists all along.
So far, the army in Turkey, the largest single military force in NATO, have managed to keep themselves relatively distant from the contradictions of their country's deepening crisis. Many senior officers claim that although they're now heavily committed to enforcing Mr. Ecevit's martial law, they've no wish to become enmeshed in other problems which they're not qualified to solve. They're also adamant that nothing like Iran could happen here because democratic institutions are more firmly rooted and there's no single personality like the Shah on which opposition could be focused. But the army, like everyone else in Turkey, is also a victim of the present crisis. And if the economy and political violence continue to deteriorate, it's obvious that there could well be a time when the generals won't feel neutral any longer.